for very young children, vaccinating them, basically you're saying causes the opposite response to what you want. You think you're protecting them, but actually you're making them more vulnerable. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, with these COVID vaccines. The key here, why we are so disturbed by what has happened, is because remember, you have the FDA took a submission from Pfizer and Moderna to approve these vaccines in children as young as 6 months old to 4 years or 5 years old, besides the ones from 6 to 11 and then 12 to 17, etc. But let's focus on these young kids. And the CDC just rubber stamped it. We just went through that, I think the third or fourth week of June, where they had their meetings. Now, from a purist point of view, and a research methodologist and a biostatistician, epidemiologist, evidence-based medicine person I am, when you look at tables 19 and 20 in the submission, the June 15th submission that the FDA looked at in their decision making, tables 19 and 20 are very instructive, because even to the untrained viewer, what do you see? You see the CDC and the FDA making decisions on a very small sample size, as little as 10 children in some instances. Very, very small. They started off with about 4,500 children. Somewhere along the line, Pfizer and Moderna displaced about 3,000, and then the numbers even dropped down to a couple hundred. And we have no full accounting as to what happened to those children and why they were not included in the study and the analysis. We have small number of events. We have like 2 events in one arm of the trial, 1 event in the other. We know from a scientific point of view, a methodological point of view, that is a red flag for high risk of overestimating the treatment effect. We don't make policy decisions or any kind of decision on 2 events or 3 events in a study, 2 in one arm, 1 in the other. We look at the 95% confidence intervals, and we see they run from China on one side back to California on the other side of the world, because it's so broad. There's so much uncertainty in terms of whether it's beneficial or not. And we found, when you read the submission, you see that at some point they reported that children who got multiple infections of COVID were vaccinated. But that's a red flag. We also read that the children who got the most severe adverse events were vaccinated. So it boggles the mind, it stretches the imagination as to how they could have gone on and approved these vaccines in little children. And so we have the data to show that there is no data that FDA and CDC looked at, submitted from Pfizer and Moderna, that should tell any sound person that they should have gotten approval, any EAU, any approval for these vaccines in children 6 months to 4 years old. The data is just not there. I will challenge anyone at CDC and anyone at FDA to debate me, just me, or Dr. Reish or Dr. McCullough. Just explain to us how you could look at tables 19 and 20 in that June 16, 2022 submission that you had in front of you, that you made a decision to vaccinate our children. So you're not even looking at the science.
We live in an era of censorship and disinformation, and it can be really hard to know what's true and what's false in this information climate. To get honest information and insights you can trust, join us on Epoch TV. You can sign up for your 14-day free trial at ept.ms/freetrialjan. That's ept.ms/freetrialjan.
What we are saying is this. The innate immune system has a window of opportunity to be trained. And in children have that window of opportunity, in very young children, soon after their maternal antibodies fade, because that doesn't last forever. They need to train their innate immune system. It is their first line. It is my first line. We had our innate immune system trained when we were young. But today, children are confronted with this COVID vaccine. Now we are pushing, we just discussed, we are trying to tell parents, look, this is a risk management decision you must make that they are not making for you. And the risk management decision is this. CDC own data says children have a near statistical zero risk of severe outcome or death, severe illness or death from COVID. That is data that existed. We looked at all of the data in Germany. For the entire pandemic, no healthy young child died of COVID. None, zero. We looked at the data in Sweden. No healthy young child throughout the pandemic has died of COVID. Dr. Marty Makary, Johns Hopkins, his team looked at all of the deaths that CDC said pegged to COVID with a child. There's roughly 400 in America since pandemic, young children, since the pandemic began, 400. They have reported that there is not one healthy child. And I need to say it again slowly. We have no evidence in the United States of America of not one healthy child that was infected with COVID and died from COVID. And that's a fact and that's the data. I challenge anyone to show us any alternative data. I am not saying, listen, the death of a child is the most devastating, tragic event ever. You could never recover as a parent, well, far less the dead child. But the reality about it is that the children that have died, that CDC has said died with a diagnosis of COVID connected to them, when we look at the data dedicatedly, these children were not well children. They had a lot of illness. Morbid obesity has emerged as a superloaded risk factor for severe outcomes in COVID, regardless of age. That's the one risk factor that set age aside. Age has remained the principal risk factor for COVID. We know that the principal risk persons who died were very elderly people over the age of 80. That's a fact. Then when you add into comorbidities, that brought the age down. We had younger persons below 80 who died because they were unwell. They had 2 to 3 underlying medical conditions. But morbid obesity strips age away. Age falls apart from the models because obesity on its own is a potent problem. What am I saying? I'm saying that children, healthy children, left on their own because of their almost zero risk of severe outcome or death from COVID, do not need these COVID injections. They never did need these COVID injections. But now we've gone a step further. We are actually trying to explain to parents that there is an innate immune compartment of your immune system that we all have, but it needs initially to be educated and trained. It gets that by the innate antibodies being exposed to pathogen and allowed to train. So much so, we are looking at the data in Africa today and we are saying Africa is winning. Why? Because a lot of the young people and children were not vaccinated. And I know this because I look at the data every day. I could see the vaccination rate by country. And the African countries have almost zero vaccine rates. They've not vaccinated their populations. What does that mean? That means that their young children and young people have benefited. Their innate immune system has benefited from the training that it normally needs. So when Omicron bear down on Africa, these children and young people had their innate immune antibodies and innate immune system trained, so it was able to deal with Omicron and provide the type of immunity.